Ahoy there, history fans, and welcome aboard for a deep dive that's going to take us straight back to 1588, the year of the Spanish Armada.
Ah, the Armada.
But we're not focusing on the big battles this time. Instead, we're going below deck, getting up close and personal with the everyday life of an English sailor.
I like it.
So think cramped quarters, hardtack, and,
Yeah.
well, let's just say the food situation wasn't exactly five-star dining.
Right.
Luckily, we've got two amazing sources to help us navigate this historical deep dive.
Okay.
One that really gets into the nitty-gritty of daily life for these sailors,
Yeah.
and another that gives us the wider context of the whole Spanish Armada story.
So,
Are you ready to climb aboard and experience history like never before?
let's do it.
All right. Well, our day in the life source, it starts with our sailor waking up in these, well, pretty awful conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, picture this. Cramped, dark, smelly quarters.
Oh.
And for breakfast, you guessed it, hardtack those rock-hard biscuits and some, shall we say, preserved meat.
Sounds delightful.
I'm already feeling a little queasy just thinking about it. But seriously, how did sailors survive on this kind of diet day after day?
Well, you have to remember that keeping food fresh on long sea voyages was a massive challenge back then.
Yeah, makes sense.
You're talking weeks or even months at sea.
Wow.
No refrigerators, no fancy preservation techniques like we have today.
Right.
So it was all about making food last as long as possible, salting, drying, pickling, you name it.
And hardtack, I mean, it sounds awful, but I guess it was the perfect solution in that context, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hardtack, as unappetizing as it might seem to us now, was a technological marvel for its time.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I mean, think about it. A simple biscuit that could last for months, even years.
Wow.
It enabled exploration, trade, warfare. It really helped shape the world as we know it.
It's funny how something so basic could have such a huge impact.
Absolutely.
And I'm guessing fresh water wasn't exactly abundant on these ships either.
No, not at all. Stored water would quickly go stale, so beer was actually a common drink on board. Beer.
Yep. And not just because they fancied a pint after a hard day's work. The brewing process actually made it safer to drink than the water.
So it was basically a health precaution. That's amazing.
Exactly.
You know, we often picture sailors as these swashbuckling adventurers, but our source really highlights the constant danger they faced.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, climbing the rigging, hauling those massive cannons, it sounds terrifying. Did that ever make them hesitate to do their jobs?
You know, looking back, it's easy to romanticize that era, but the reality was incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Those ships were incredibly tall. The rigging was a complex network of ropes. One wrong step, and, well, you can imagine the consequences.
It doesn't bear thinking about. And those cannons, I mean, they must have been incredibly heavy and difficult to handle.
Oh, absolutely. The cannons weighed tons, and even a small mistake could be deadly for the crew and for the ship itself.
Teamwork must have been essential. Oh, essential is an understatement. You needed perfect coordination, discipline, everyone working together like a well-oiled machine.
It really puts things into perspective. I mean, I complained about traffic on my way to work, but
Right.
these guys were risking their lives every single day. And it sounds like even lunchtime wasn't a break from the tension.
No?
Our source mentions this constant fear of the Spanish Armada.
Right.
Any ship on the horizon could be the enemy.
It's true.
Why was that threat so real and so constant?
Well, England and Spain, let's just say they weren't exactly best buds at the time.
It was a bit more than that, right?
Oh, yeah. There was political rivalry, economic competition, and then you throw in religious tension. It was a powder keg waiting to explode.
Religious tension.
Oh, yeah, England was Protestant, Spain was Catholic, and that really fueled the animosity between them.
So this wasn't just about territory or power, it was about faith, too.
Absolutely. And then you had figures like Sir Francis Drake, basically a state-sanctioned pirate.
Drake, the explorer.
The very same. But he spent years raiding Spanish ships and settlements.
Oh, wow.
From the Spanish perspective, England was a constant thorn in their side.
So England had been poking the bear, and now the bear was coming for revenge.
Exact.
It's no wonder those English sailors were on edge.
And Philip II of Spain, he intended the Armada to be this overwhelming force, a show of strength to bring England to heel once and for all.
And our poor English sailor is stuck right in the middle of it all.
He is.
But even with that threat looming, they still had to train, right? Our source describes these intense cannon drills every afternoon. Noise, smoke. I mean, how did they focus with that constant fear hanging over them?
You know, we often romanticize those sailors, but it's easy to forget how demanding their lives were.
Right.
Those drills, they were absolutely crucial because in a naval battle, the speed and accuracy of your cannons could determine the outcome.
So it's like a high-stakes sporting event almost,
Yeah.
where split-second decisions and muscle memory could mean life or death.
You got it.
But tell me, what kind of cannons were they using back then?
Primarily heavy iron cannons that fired these massive iron balls.
Oh, wow.
Each shot required a coordinated effort from multiple sailors.
So it's not just point and shoot.
No, it was dangerous, exhausting work.
And all of this happening under the constant threat of a Spanish attack.
Yep.
It's incredible the mental toughness these sailors must have had, like living with a sword hanging over their heads, never knowing when it might drop.
It was a very real threat.
So did they get any time to relax after a day like that?
Well, our source mentions them trying to find some joy in the evenings, singing, telling stories, anything to take their minds off the constant threat of battle.
What kind of stories do you think they told?
It's interesting to imagine, right?
Yeah.
I bet it was a mix of everything. Heroic tales of past battles, maybe some exaggerated accounts of Drake's exploits, and of course, a few spooky sea monster stories to keep things interesting.
To distract them from the fear and uncertainty?
Exactly.
But I imagine as soon as the sun set, the real fear would set in.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone had to take night watch.
Right.
Our Day in the Life source really paints a bleak picture of that experience.
It was.
Cold, dark, isolated, just you and the vastness of the sea. Why even have someone on watch all night?
Well, night attacks, they were a very real threat.
Oh, okay.
A good lookout could be the difference between being caught by surprise and having time to prepare for battle.
So one sailor, alone in the dark, is essentially holding the fate of the entire ship in his hands.
You could say that?
Talk about pressure. Just imagine trying to stay alert for hours on end. Cold, dark, every shadow potentially an enemy ship.
It was an incredibly demanding job, that's for sure.
And this is all before the Armada even arrives.
Yes.
Our story, the Armada source, tells us the English did eventually win, but I can't imagine life got any easier for those sailors even after the victory.
You're right. Defeating the Armada was a huge turning point for England, but for the ordinary sailor, life at sea remained incredibly challenging.
So even after risking their lives for their country, it was right back to that same harsh reality.
For many of them, yes.
Makes you wonder what happened to those sailors after the Armada was defeated.
That's a good question.
Did they sail home to parades and celebrations? Or was it straight back to the grind?
Well, that's a question that takes us into some of the less celebrated aspects of a sailor's life in those days.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
The victory against the Armada may have changed England's destiny, but for many of those sailors, the hardships were far from over.
So, no ticker tape parade for our brave sailors then. What happened to them after they defeated the Armada? Did they just go back to sea?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, England was really building its naval power at the time.
Right.
They were exploring new territories, establishing trade routes, and let's be honest, getting into their fair share of scraps along the way.
So, even after facing the Spanish Armada, it was back to the same old dangers. It just makes you wonder, what was the point of all that risk if things didn't really change for these guys?